Sir.
Good morning.
So I just want to hear, is this presentation going to be recorded?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks, because I just need to go sort something out. I have a bit of a crisis at the moment.
Okay, no problem, no problem. MVC app, for example, you normally have different modules. Like here I have security, customers, products, but they all are in one app, and you have got one exe file that you deploy. And these little blue arrows between them, that represents the communication, and then they can also obviously access your database and files on disk and data from internet. The main idea here is that it is one app, one file that you deploy to whatever production environment you have. Pros, advantages of monolithic apps is that the communication between your modules are fast and easy to work with, since it's already built into the framework. And it's a proven technology that's been used for many years, so there's lots of information available on it. On the right-hand side are the microservices. Now, here it's a bit different. Here, each of those modules becomes a small app on its own, if we can call it like that. So each one will have its own exe file if you work on premises, or even in cloud, you might have exe files running in containers. But the idea is that each service becomes its own little application. Each one could even have its own database. They usually don't share the same database, so they don't influence each other. Also, there's no direct communication between them. The communication goes through what is called a message bus. And this communication it's much more involved, since it's between applications. These applications can be on different computers, they can be in different countries. So this communication between them actually becomes a science in its own right. So yeah, it's a total different setup. Advantages of microservices is that, for example, programmers only need to focus on individual services at a time. Services don't influence each other. Services are deployed individually, no waiting for other teams to be ready before you can test your service. In a monolithic app, if you want to make some changes to your customers module, for example, then you have to wait for everybody to be finished with their work. Let's say every Friday you can deploy, so you have to wait for each Friday before you can perform all your final tests. Here it's different. If you only work on customers, you only deploy customers when you are done, and it should not influence the other systems, and they shouldn't influence you. We teach the monolithic structure in the second year, because if you want to get a job, you need to know it, because most companies still use it. However, if you want to keep your job, you must know microservices, because lots of companies are moving to the cloud environment and going into microservices. So you need to learn both of these architectures over the span of your career. Also, Armand will be talking about on-premise and cloud-based environments. As I said, the second year focuses more on on-premise architectures, and the third year more on cloud-based environments. So we touch on both of those. Also in the third year, we do data engineering, cloud-based data engineering. So there's the programming as well as data engineering. We focus on Azure in the third year. Right. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Isaac Lupanda. He's the head of our program. Mr. Lupanda oversees all our programming courses at CTU. He's our boss when it comes to programming. He's well experienced in software development and data analysis in both cloud and on-premise environments. And he's fluent in French and English, but I think his kids are speaking Afrikaans. His children understand Afrikaans. So you can just imagine a family fight in that house, how that will go. Very interesting. And Mr. Lupanda is currently doing his doctor's degree on artificial intelligence. Quite a clever man. So yeah, we are privileged to have him at CTU. I know him that as a very hard worker and a very smart guy. Mr. Lupanda is going to take over, and let's hear what he has to say. Thank you, Mr. Lupanda. You can share your screen at that side.
Okay, thank you, Karat. Thank you for a brilliant introduction. I have nothing to share with my student. We are all here to listen to Armand. Guys, I would like first to thank everyone who is here in the meeting, our student, and then a special thank to Mr. Armand Jordaan. Thank you very much, Armand, for making time to come and talk to us. Guys, I'm just going to be very short. What I'm going to ask you, please pay attention. Such opportunity to interact with guru in the IT field are not coming cheap. We have the privilege to have Armand. Armand was our student. He did his studies at CTU, is now working as a professional developer with more than 9 years of experience. Please pay attention. Let's listen to what you want to talk to us, what you want to tell us, and then ask a question. We're going to give you an opportunity. Let's allow him to present. We'll give you time so you can ask question. And then to finish, I would like to also ask our student, the life you have chosen is the life of a developer. The life of a software developer can be resumed in 3 lines. A software developer will always be disciplined. You should always have a purpose, and then you must always be a hard worker. That's the only way to survive. Thank you again, Mr. Karat, and then I'm going to give a chance Armand. Please, Armand, you can share your screen and then start with your presentation.
Right, good morning, guys. Thank you for that fantastic introduction and the brief explanation of the different architectures, on-prem and cloud-based. I think that's very relevant to our discussion today, so that was really awesome. Before I'd like to begin, I'd like to thank everybody, Isaac, Karat, and CTU for inviting me again to speak with you guys. It is a great opportunity. I can relate to where you guys, or what you guys are going through as students. I've been there myself in the early 2012 about, and it's quite a exciting yet an unknown time in your career. It's going to be quite interesting to see how that evolves over the coming years. And like Isaac mentioned, the 3 tenets, it's discipline, hard work, and perseverance. It does not come cheap. There will be lots of sacrifices throughout your career. But again, if you stick to those 3 tenets, you're going to have a successful career and a long career at that. Cool. So we've done the introduction. So to enter the job market and how best to set yourself up for success, that's going to be the main premise of this. And it's going to talk about how you can get started as your career as a software developer, hence preparing your career as a software developer. I'll also be trialing some new presentation software that's non-Microsoft or Google. So let's see how this goes. Fantastic. So just a brief introduction about the section. So my name is Armand Jordaan. As mentioned, I've got 9 years experience as a full stack software developer. So that entails both front end, back end code, databases, and everything in between. I've worked in industries such as marketing, property, online gaming, HR and payroll, retail, and insurance. Some fun facts about this. Marketing has possibly been one of the most interesting industries to work with, as the data always changes and there's lots of insights within it. Property and online gaming has definitely been the most regulated as well as the most complex to work with, as well as insurance. Insurance and how they set up the policies is also quite interesting, and with rating agencies and so on. HR and payroll, quite standard. Mostly work within the cloud and Azure space for that section. Retail was definitely the longest hours that I've ever worked on a system. There's constant changes in terms of your domain that's fluctuating, and there it's all about responsiveness and responding to your market. But I think that goes just without saying across all the different industries as well. I built my first CRM system for a JC-listed company at age 20. Since then, I've been a technical lead on projects, mentored interns, as well as junior developers. And then I have some interests outside of studying software, like philosophy, psychology, leadership, and drumming. For the last year, I've been playing the role of a consultant, which has allowed me to work with a few teams. And I've seen some interesting tech stacks and the use of technology. I've worked in both AWS and Azure production environments and seen some different strategies when it comes to managing teams, hiring new talent, and handling production failures. So, having moved away from consulting to a permanent position as a senior software engineer, currently I'm working as a senior software engineer at an Australian-based company called Covela, with help from OfficeN. More on that a bit later. So, Covela's technology enables established local companies to work together to effectively compete for customers, for customers on the global stage. We have offices in Melbourne, Cape Town, and Dubai. The other two main platforms come in the form of Axelion, and whose main audience is in New Zealand and Australia, with a value proposition of handling customer data in an ethical and practical way. Narrative is focused on Middle East and African markets. It provides a platform for providers, publishers, marketers, and agencies and brands all to collaborate together and share data across. At a high level, the best way to reason about all these platforms can be put together as the following. A single combined customer profile. This is also not the first time working with, it's also not my first time working with teams abroad. I also have worked with teams in the UK, US, and Europe. Before we get into the outline of this talk and sort of now the introduction part, I believe it is important to first get into the right context, given where you guys are at in your career. So I came across this image, which I found to be quite profound. All of us developers will be subjected to the same process, regardless if you've been coding for 3, 10, or more years, especially for you just starting out your career, both as interns and junior developers. The most daunting step is always to first start. That's the most important thing, is to, when you get started, is instead of looking at the end goal of I need to get a job, the first thing you need to take a look at is break that down into smaller steps. This can be in your personal life, both and in career. When you try to tackle these monolithic tasks, if you will, that's just setting yourself up for failure. So breaking up into smaller tasks, actionable things, so you can get that momentum and get the momentum towards success and just get started. Taking this feedback as a result from the previous talk, and this is the second time presenting it, I only saw about 1 or 2% actually took up this advice and started their careers. So the choice comes down to you as a student. What do you want to be? Do you want to be complete your normal studies, then go out in the job market, say, I need a job, and then sort of wait for the industry to respond to you? Unfortunately, it does not work that way. You have to go out there and make something of yourself, and you set your own standard and quality. So you have a choice by the end of this talk. Are you going to actually act upon the information given and action it, or are you going to go back to your daily routine and continue day in and day out? What's quite interesting about this is that students who start quite early, like second years, for example, even at the first year, you start building out your portfolio, which we'll get into in a moment. You're going to see rapid career progression as you go along. Whereas if you start as early as possible, that'll only pay off in interest in 4 or 5 years down the line. By that time, when you start moving up into your intermediate position after 4 years of experience, those who haven't started with their portfolios or their continuous learning, if you will still be stuck, or will either be stuck as a junior developer or still moving into that position. So again, it's about getting that competitive advantage in the market. And again, guys, the harsh truth about this is, yes, you're a student at a formal institution. You also have to compete with the bootcamp students and the self-taught developers who don't have the opportunity to go to a formal education institution. So, and I've seen quite a few developers coming into the market who are trading blows with degree graduates, and even us on our NQF5s and NQF6s as well. So there is a lot of competition, but there's also, within competition, there's opportunity for massive success. With that aside, let's dive into our topics of discussion. We're going to take a look at the industry insights, both for local and international. So these are conducted with 2 different surveys. We'll get that in a moment. Then setting up a portfolio, project ideas, leveraging social media, and leveraging social media to take your brand to market. Now, what's going to be quite interesting about the next section in terms of interviews is I briefly mentioned the concept of your brand. Here we'll take a look at how you can get set up for those interviews, working with platforms and recruiters, and as well as how to best prepare for them. So unfortunately, there's no cut and dry principle when it comes to sort of working with recruiters and platforms. This is sort of all the stuff that I've learned over the last 9 years. And then we'll close off with some final takes and some quick 5 pointers, what you can take away from this, and some actionable items on this. Yeah, as Isaac mentioned, there'll be a Q&A at the end, so looking forward to those questions. Fantastic. So taking a look at some insights here. So OfferZen conducted a survey to find out more about developer skills, work experience, and job search behavior. A total of 4,922 people took part in this online survey between 6 October and 22 October 2020. Of these responses, 3,519 responses were counted as valid because they were from developers who are currently employed or have experience in South Africa. OfferZen mentions in their report that there has been a huge shift towards remote work in the industry given the pandemic. I personally have been a remote worker for 4 years, And I've seen how people have to quickly adapt from an office being permanently office-based to being based at home. There's also some talks of some part-time office sharing as well for people who want to go in due to their current circumstances as well. What's quite interesting is seeing the people's management styles change from being in person in an office to now being completely remote. And there are a lot of funny stories, as we've seen online, that has happened. So the second survey we'll take a look at is from Stack Overflow. As students, I expect you guys to know what Stack Overflow is. So for almost a decade, Stack Overflow's annual developer survey has held the honor of being the largest survey of people who code around the world. The 2020 reports included feedback from 65,000 developers around the world. It is important to note that this was taken in February before the pandemic. So this is February 2020. The 2021 report will be made available later this year. So that's the complete offer, or the complete surveys. Links are available on all the slides. So, and there's a lot more information than just what I'm about to present. I think having to go through each survey independently will take at least a day to go through all of that data, but there's a lot of insights, and I highly recommend students to take a look at that and read through it, just sort of align yourself with the industry. Cool. So looking at the local Offers in data first, I'll get into what Offers in is later when we get to the recruiting agencies and platforms. So here we can see a breakdown of the top 5 languages developers currently work with the most. Again, this is South African data. We've got JavaScript, SQL, C#, Java, and Python amongst the top 5. The top 3 languages are aligned with the most used frameworks like ASP.NET, .NET Core, which we see in the next slide when we look at the frameworks. So as mentioned, again, you guys are going to hear a lot about different frameworks and languages in the coming slides. So mostly for the South African market, when I refer to the Microsoft stack, I'm talking about ASP.NET, .NET Core, .NET 5, C#, SQL, JavaScript, and TypeScript, if you will. TypeScript being a bit more open source, but it's still a descendant from sort of the object-oriented programming languages. Cool. You see at the bottom left on the slides we've made available, so you can go and take a look at these stats or the survey itself at a later stage. So changing gears towards the frameworks, and I think this is where we're going to have a nice conversation. So when we look at frameworks, I sort of broke this up into 2 separate sections. On the left, we can see the top 5 frameworks like ASP.NET, .NET Core, Angular, Node.js, and React. Currently, ASP.NET sits at 29.9%. That is shortly followed by .NET and Angular. So as Gerard mentioned in his quick introduction there, most of the monolithic applications and most of your big corporates, some startups as well, still definitely leverage ASP.NET quite extensively. That's your Razor pages and the whole architecture that goes along with it. Again, when you contrast that to what's happening on the right-hand side, the most desired, i.e. what developers want to work with the most, we see ASP.NET drop down to 11% and a React front-end framework shoot up to 29.6%, which does indicate a move to a more decoupled front-end and back-end. That's sort of the microservice architecture, if you will, that Karen mentioned. Don't get me wrong here, there is still plenty of large projects utilizing ASP.NET, and it's definitely a framework worth knowing, but also worth your time in learning front-end frameworks like React, Angular, there's Vue.js, and a bunch of others. They just write themselves. They pop up every couple of months. But definitely React and Angular is your big ones that you can definitely bank on that you will use in a production environment. All 3 of these technologies, React, Angular, and ASP.NET, have their pros and cons, and depends on the problem or the architecture you are going to work with. So again, as you guys will see throughout your career, there's hardly ever a silver bullet to a specific problem. And one thing about developers, they are quite opinionated about their frameworks. And when you have a framework fanboy, if you will, they will promote that to the best of their ability. Starting out with my career, I was 100% all Microsoft tech. It's Microsoft or death. But having now seen sort of the rise of the new languages coming in, it really depends on the problem, your architecture, your team that you're working with, and what best language to go and can address that problem. So I think if anything, developers are spoiled for choice when it comes to different frameworks. But having that said, it is important to still have a core specialization. As you see most throughout your training at CTU, do your Microsoft certification or your vendor certification, we'll get into that a bit later, as well as your NQF qualifications, which is also important. More on that later. Coming back to the .NET discussion, in South Africa, I think it's definitely to your advantage to know and understand ASP.NET and C# and all the different iterations of that for your bigger corporate clients, as well as your some startups as well. But again, to combine that with sort of a scripting language, this is now your Node.js or your Python, for example, as a complementary to your skill set. because again, you're a lot more diverse. And as we'll discuss later, when working with recruiters and entering the job market, the company is interested in what your value proposition, what value will you bring to the team, and how fluid can you be when adapting to new technologies. Because if I've seen anything over the 9 years, and I'm sure people have been in this industry far longer than myself, it changes very quickly. So your learning will never stop. We'll get into learning a bit later with some pointers on that. But yeah, I'm going to stop there. There's a lot to learn, and you can never be a true expert to know something. You can know it exceptionally well and become a specialist. But what you'll also see in terms of the demographic of South African developers, there's a lot more full stacks than only back-end and only front-end developers. So you can really choose where you want to specialize in one of those. Myself, including full stack development, offers a unique proposition, if you will. Because you have knowledge about both front-end, your gateway layers, if you look at microservices, all the way down to the database, you sort of see the full scope. And especially if you want on the track to become a development manager, a software architect, a solutions architect as well, you sort of need that scope, that context to really engage with your different developers. Having that said, looking at how teams are structured, again, it depends on the company. Each company is structured differently. But generalizing here in sort of a squad-based structure, we normally have 5 people a part of it. The squad structure will be dependent on what project you are tackling and what problem you're solving. And you may not even be part of that squad for a long time. It may be 2 weeks, a month, or 3 months, and you get moved to a different team. So again, the more skill sets and more frameworks you can tack onto your skill set, the more value proposition you have towards the company, as well as the more valued you become in a squad structure itself. Having that said, if you want to specialize in front-end only development or only back-end development, or databases is your thing, you can still do that, but know that you are limiting your start-out prospects, because I highly doubt a business would specifically look for a front-end junior developer only. But again, before you're starting out the career, having that broad knowledge across all the different stacks would really just add to your CV, to be honest. Cool. Changing gears to look at the most popular languages. Now we're on the Stack Overflow data, looking at international data for this, and it gets interesting. Looking at some of the popular languages from Stack Overflow International Survey, we see that JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and SQL among the top 3, followed by Python and Java. Fortunately, C# is not on there. However, it does get an honorable mention. It's coming in at 7th place and TypeScript at 9th place. So that sort of gives you a scope of where South African technology is sitting at when compared with the world. Again, this is not this is good, this is bad comparison. Not at all. It just goes to show the types of problems that are being solved. And I definitely think if you're looking towards the AI and machine learning aspect of things, Python may be a preferred language to go take a look at. I know Microsoft has got their R language, so there's that as well. But Python is quite versatile in what you can do with it. So I'll leave it at that. Looking at some frameworks, the used versus desired. Now, here we have the most loved, which is the percentage of developers who are developing with a language or technology and have expressed an interest in continuing to develop with it. And the most wanted is the percentage of developers who are developing with a language or technology, but have, no, it's the wrong one. So they want to work with this section, the most wanted from the devs. Again, this paints a very different picture. C# is not on here. So you got something from Rust, which is quite a relatively new language, coming on the most loved at 86.1%. Then shortly followed by a tight competition between TypeScript, Python, Kotlin, and Go. So Kotlin, more on the Java stack. That's quite an interesting language. Google's Go is again there, and Python coming in. So again, so scripting languages are definitely making quite a big improvement here. Then on the most wanted, again, you'll see Python coming in on the 30%. So these are all percentages taken across from all of the different developers. So I think that this again paints a different picture. So if you want to go and right off the get-go, start looking for international opportunity, these are sort of the languages and frameworks you're going to be taking a look at. Again, this is now where more your formal qualification, like your NQF level, really comes out and shines on this. So completing that NQF level 6 is quite advised. So all of this data going by this, as I mentioned. So I think at Covela, what we are using currently, we're using both JavaScript, TypeScript, Node.js, Python, .NET, and ASP.NET. Yes, that's a lot of different technologies, but again, it goes about the problems that you are solving with it. So I think specializing in .NET for South African market is highly advised. and then sort of combining that, as I mentioned earlier, with a Python or a Node.js language. Again, the problem that you're solving really depends on that. You'll also see in both the surveys, they compare salaries as well. And what I see is that locally in South Africa, for .NET, salaries are quite higher when compared to the other ones. I believe Ruby also pays a lot in terms of their developers. But again, that's sort of a niche community and language to work in. I'm sure I've upset a few Ruby developers now, but it's okay. Cool. Let's get into the real meat and potatoes, the fun stuff that I want to get into. So why build a portfolio? Isn't my CV and certifications enough? Well, no. Your vendor-specific, i.e. AWS or Azure certifications are to show you've passed a technical proficiency test in that given technology. Your NQF qualification shows your education level when measured against other candidates. Again, NQF levels are quite important. Your CV is just a brief summary of you, the professional, and is used during candidate search to weed out candidates who are applying for positions they have zero experience in. You guys will be surprised at the amount of candidates who would apply for a developer position, yet they are perhaps in the technical field or in a field that's completely unrelated. They've completed a boot camp and now they want to become a developer. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. You have to have a robust portfolio and a lot of, at least some sort of vendor-specific certifications. If you have NQF, fantastic, but that vendor certifications is quite advantageous. So when you combine your portfolio, your CV, your NQF, and your vendor-specific qualifications, you have a higher chance of getting invited for an interview, because that is what all those things are. They are there building up your skill set to provide a value offering to the team or but ultimately your customer, who's going to be your future employer. So one of the most important questions, where should I host my code? So Armand, you're talking about, so I know how to create a CV, and we'll get into CV creation a bit later. There are some fun versions around that, but also focusing on the portfolio. So do I just put this all on a memory stick and give it to the employer? Well, no, you don't do that. You can use a central repository to share that code. So probably up until this point, like I mentioned, you've probably only shared your code with your lecturer or your friends, even though you have copied most of it from a textbook or Stack Overflow. That is a joke. It's humor. I was there for that as well. And you're actually quite interesting. Doesn't matter how many years of development you do, you still reference online documentation, be it for in the JavaScript stack, sort of your map, reduce, and that sort of stuff. On C#, your basic looping structures sometimes. It depends on the context and just the day if you can remember it or not. There are some developers who basically refuse to look at online sources and they memorize everything. I am not one of those devs. I do use resources where I can to solve my problem effectively and as quickly as possible. One of the other questions that I got in the previous session was, but won't people steal my code? Sort of one of the concerns. It's an interesting question that, and again, I'm not knocking the person, but the question is quite common and quite valuable, as not only a student will ask that, but also in terms of companies who refuse to sort of buy into the open source community and the collaboration of software. There are still some of those out there. So looking at that, there was once a interesting story about this section. Now focusing or changing gears towards open source more. There was once a CEO at Microsoft named Steve Ballmer. He was in the early 2000s. Some of you may or may not have heard of him. He was quite a character and has been immortalized in the form of many memes and GIFs. He too shared a strong resistance to anything open source. And during his time at the helm of Microsoft, he turned the company against the open source community, which was to their own detriment. Luckily, the hero of the story came in the form of the current CEO, Satya Nadella, if I pronounced his name correctly, or if I butchered it, I apologize, who has been a huge supporter of moving Microsoft to a more collaborative, cloud-first, mobile-first company. And since he took charge of Microsoft, it has done a complete 180 on Ballmer's approach to open source. It is a lot more collaborative, as I mentioned. In fact, most developers still don't know to today that on GitHub, you can access the source code for .NET, VS Code, ASP.NET, and others. So instead of going to this whole, this is my source code, I'm not going to share it with the world, well, Microsoft has done just that. We'll discuss a bit more about what GitHub is, the acquisition of it, and that sort of stuff in the coming slides. So to answer the question of where should I host my code? Well, first, to answer this question, we first have to look at the underlying protocol called Git and the code hosting provider such as GitHub. Although GitHub has become much more than just a place to store your code, you can do a lot with it, but we'll get into that more on that later. So Git, introducing Git, it was created by a guy named Linus Torvalds, always messes up his name, in 2005. Going to quick pause there. If you don't know who Linus Torvalds is, he is from the open source community. He has done a lot of work on Linux as well. He's worth knowing about and some of his achievements. He's a great collaborator, and he's got some strong opinions on certain things, which I think opinions are a good thing to have, definitely. So he's done, as I mentioned, he's done some developments on the Linux kernel, well, not some, quite a lot. So with the help of himself and his team later on, they developed this initial protocol called Git. So, which was created in 2005. So Git is a distributed version control system designed to handle everything from small to very large projects with speed and efficiency, i.e. multiple developers from anywhere in the world working on the same code base. Prior to this, it was quite a challenge to share code. There was something called SVN prior to this, which was an absolute nightmare to work with, in my own opinion. And when companies started moving over to the Git protocol and GitHub later on, it was phenomenal. A lot more collaboration happened, and just your entire time to fixing a bug has definitely decreased just doing that small change. What I will say though is you can host Git on your own in an own Git server, but again, you'll be losing out on a lot of features that was added on by people from GitHub. Or again, GitHub's not the only sort of source code place where you can go and install your code for that. There are other ones available as well, but GitHub being the most popular. So you can download it from the following URL, git-sem. You can use either the Git CLI or the Git GUI or graphical user interface. I do recommend you first learn and understand Git and its commands before using a Git client, for example, as there will be times where the Git client is too slow. There are a few of them a little bit slower than others, or you have to do something that the client does not support yet. So knowing the command line, as you guys will see throughout your career, some developers prefer to use graphical user interfaces over command line. I was one of those, but in the last 3-4 years, I've definitely gravitated more towards using everything in the command line as much as I can, just for general productivity. You understand the technology and you know what needs to be done, and you can type faster than clicking around. That's just a proven fact. Cool. So you can learn the very basics of Git in a few minutes, and there are some great free online courses available to help you working with Git and GitHub in a few hours or so. So please do not feel intimidated by this. Non-technical people have learned it as well, so it's really not that bad. Yes, I expect any developer in a team or a possible candidate to know this, as this will not be taught on the job. So when you start, we expect you to know Git and how to work with it, because nobody's going to hold your hand when you get started in your first occupation. So in that, probably when you do start at a company, you'll probably get told like, hey, here's the Git repo, go and pull it from there. Repo is the place where you store your code. Pulling is the fact of copying it down from the centralized source down to your local machine, and then you sort of start combing through the code and get it to build. This is more in any solution, basically, get it to run on your local machine, and then you're sort of up and running with that. Also, they'll require you to install, they'll give you probably a blank machine or an empty machine rather, with no pre-installed software, and you'll be required to go set up your database management system, your Visual Studio, your VS Code, or whatever environment you work with, set up local environment variables, as well as setting up your Git account and so on. So that's all on your first couple of hours when you start at a new position. Cool. So introducing GitHub. It was founded in 2008 by Chris, Tom, and PJ. I do have their surnames in there. I'll probably butcher them. So it's the world's largest host service of software. And that is quite important. What's interesting about this is Git was created in about 2005. And then a couple of years later, 2008, GitHub first started. What's interesting about this is that GitHub is built on top of the Git protocol, although they have added many more non-Git features. The concept of pull requests and those sort of things are on there as well. Again, you'll learn about that in a future module, hopefully. So GitHub has evolved to become so much more than just a UI on top of Git. So for those of you who will be studying your DevOps in the coming year, GitHub is definitely something to consider looking into, as well as an alternative to Azure DevOps platform. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about DevOps. I'll leave that at that. One of the best news, in my opinion, was that Microsoft acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion in 2018, further solidifying Microsoft's drive when it comes to collaboration and open source. Since the acquisition, I can say there have been some awesome features added to the platform, such as GitHub Actions. Now, as mentioned, it's not going to go into this topic. It has to do with DevOps, and third years, you'll be doing a module on change management, which definitely touches more on the business aspect of this. And as Gerard will know, I've got a huge passion when it comes to all things DevOps and management. So I'll move on swiftly away from that. So looking further at the numbers, GitHub, there's roughly about 56 million developers using it, over 3 million in terms of organization accounts, and more than 100 million code repositories. So just going by the numbers, yes, GitHub is the place to share and collaborate with other developers. And again, this is something that we expect you to know when you start an organization. Now, just a quick contrast, I didn't include in these slides, but a quick segue here. The stuff that GitHub is doing in terms of hosting your code, building your solutions, deploying that to different environments. It is not the only platform. There you'll work with other providers such as the Atlassian company. And inside of there, they've got their own thing called Bitbucket, which is your main code repo. You've got something called Bamboo, which is a build server, which will build your solutions as well as handle the deployments. There's also something called Jira, which is a task management system. There is a demo of that, of one of them, specifically more on GitHub side in a few minutes. And again, building software is so much more than just the code that you write. I would say effectively about maybe 30%, 40% of the time, it comes down to the code. But most of the time it comes to the processes and the ecosystem that's built up. Because again, it doesn't take one developer to create a system. It takes a team of them and a lot of supporting infrastructure and people as well. So let's look at a brief overview of a GitHub profile. I'll be using mine for demonstration purposes. And again, from here on, you can sort of branch out and do your own thing on your own GitHub profile. There are many examples online. Again, almost all of the profiles are publicly available. So if you see something interesting on somebody else's profile, more than happy to use it on yours. Okay, so on the left, you'd find some basic social media, a basic social media section that's similar to Facebook and Twitter. Name, handle, community in terms of followers, and some general information about the developer. To the right is a custom file called README. This is a file that should be in almost every single code repository. You can normally see it from a .md file here at the top. As you can see, so it's got the current user handle /README. There is a great how-to on their main documentation site. We'll show you exactly how to set this up, and it's quite straightforward. So again, just pause there on READMEs. README is sort of the general syntax that you'll have in sort of to do your documentation on Git. Like I mentioned, I'm quite strict when it comes to my own repos of having a README, just a general description about the project. We'll get to those in a moment. So just some basic information about it, a quick introduction, a slogan or a phrase, if you will. We'll talk more about branding and marketing in a moment. Then about the specific candidate, we can see the tech stack immediately. So there's some of the stuff that I work with in terms of code, editors, frameworks, database, and so on. We can quickly see from this candidate what they're currently learning, something in terms of Dapper, microservice architecture. I'm also busy with my own, the advanced certificate in IT database management. Then React hooks and React Native is on my learning path currently. Then working with, so this is what I'm currently working with, a Dapper e-commerce demo site for microservices. That's still under active development. That's on my own repo for that. A new blog series around microservices and a bunch of other stuff on here. So this just gives whoever's reading our profile a quick brief overview of who is this person, what is their tech stack, currently learning, what are they working on, and how to reach me. Fortunately, this screenshot is a bit short there, but basically you'll have sort of your LinkedIn, Twitter, and some Medium articles in this case as well. So we'll go on to the next one. Right underneath this, you'll find sort of your pinned projects. Now we'll get into these different projects you can go and build in a moment. So here we can see the 4 different pinned ones. What's important here, you can see the name of the repo that this is. So this is called the code repo. A brief description about it. You can see the language that it's written in, stars. Now this is quite interesting. It's for the Instagram people. This is your heart section. You press the heart button, and likes for most of the other social networks. Then so that's, it's quite surprisingly difficult to get other developers to star or to like your repo, that is. So I'm quite proud of the 74 stars on it. It still grows every time I check, but we'll see how far that project goes. Then on the right-hand side, this crab-looking thing over here, that is the amount of times other developers has forked from your repo, i.e. meaning that they've created a clone from it onto their own account. So they can now go make changes to that as much as they want, and they can just merge from the base repository, which is this one. So if I've made changes, they can take those changes and merge it into their local repository. Again, that's the beauty of working with Git and GitHub in general. There's your ability to sort of copy other code bases, make your own iterations on it, and when you are satisfied with it, you can make then sort of a submission, or which is a pull request, to a base code base or base repo, and say, hey, I've made some changes to this, or hey, there was a bug in here that I fixed. I would like to merge this back into the main repo. Do you want to accept it or not? And then you can sort of start a nice collaboration and discussion around that. We can also see that I've got 3 other projects. One is written in TypeScript. This was a basic Angular app, and just a basic command line app, and then a message bus example on RabbitMQ. Third years, you'll cover that. Mostly these 2, perhaps later. But yeah, so again, you can see this is mostly .NET. On all 3 of these are .NET Core. That's a class library, and this one is a one of those console apps. And it's more of a full-on RESTful API with all the nuts and bolts in it, without a front end. So no Razor pages, no React, just a pure RESTful API. Cool. One section below that, this shows sort of the developer's activity. So we can see clearly from 2020 on the side all the way up to 2015. I'm going to open up my account and all the different years and the collaboration that occurred. Sort of your main time series of when you've committed and when you haven't. The main section here shows sort of your commits that you're making, where most of your time is getting spent in terms of commits, pull requests, issues, and code reviews. So because this is just mostly me contributing to my own repos, it's mostly on commits. In a team or production environment, this chart will be quite inverse in terms of most of the time will be spent on code reviews, issues being bug fixes, and reviewing code as well. So this all will be more towards those sections. And the commits will definitely be on the lower side, I would say. Then at the bottom, you can see some activity. What has the developer been up to? Have they forked other repos? Have they made any commits? And so on. Here on the left-hand side, you can see what I recently contributed to. There should be not tax them was quite an interesting one. That was an interview project. So if you go online and look for tax term, it's like a tax calculator. So the exercise in this case was build a clone of that on the ASP.NET stack. But difference was we had to use Blazor for a front end, not ASP.NET. So I like to throw in these little pigments, if you will, into your interview challenges. And then, yeah, the 2 other ones, we saw that a few minutes ago. Cool. So now we're going to do a bit of a segue more to the sort of IT management, project management side of things. And again, for developers, researching this before you start as a junior will definitely give you an advantage above the rest. So I'm going to use GitHub in my own open source projects. Obviously, I can't go and share production code because that is software owned and licensed. So for this example, this is to do with Microsoft microservice templates that I was working on. What it is really irrelevant here. So you can see on the left-hand side, it is the name of the project, what's been happening yet. So green is tasks that have been done. These are sort of in progress ones, and there's quite a bit of work still on here. And it was last updated May 16th. I definitely need to get back to this. So some brief description about it, and then sort of linked repositories onto this. Again, you can link multiple repos to a project. So you don't have to stick to one. In a monolithic architecture, you'll probably have like one main repo. In a microservices, you can have between 1 to infinite numbers, depending. So that's quite cool. So you can go and create this on your own. So when you do your portfolio, we'll discuss in another section about setting up and showing progress and sort of a build log and that sort of stuff. But this is sort of where you would come into sort of create your own tasks. Now, previously, I briefly mentioned a concept of project management. Now, what you're seeing in front of you is perhaps the first time you've seen it, but this is called the Kanban board. A Kanban board, the key characteristics of this is to have columns going down. You can have n number of columns on this. Progress follows from left to right. If it's been the furthest column to the right, it's normally done. Each one of these sections is possibly referred to as a ticket, depending on what terminology you want to use. Ticket, a task. There's some subcategories like epics and that sort of stuff, but it depends on which team methodology you are following. Again, knowing about them gives you an advantage in your interview, definitely. So cool. In this case, we can see that there's a few columns on here, sort of to groom. This is some of the stuff I have to go through. To do, I have to pick this up. Then in progress, what I'm actively working on. Pending approval. So this is in the case if I was working with a team. So I've done some changes. And I can ask, hey, Isaac, I've made some changes. Would you mind reviewing this code for me? Just check that I'm conforming to whatever syntax outline or language outlines we've identified. A basic example may be in C#, an if statement. Instead, if an if statement has got a single line as its body, you have to wrap that in curly braces. Otherwise, if it's the complete opposite, you don't need to use curly braces, and the if statement just becomes 2-line, which is my personal preference. So that's sort of where we'll check some things around language. Or, for example, start a conversation like, hey, I've seen you've done it. You've used a for loop instead of a different loop. Why is that? Think for performance, and you get the idea of collaboration in terms of that. And you can then move that ticket back into sort of in progress for the developer to pick up and complete. Or if everybody's happy, the reviewers, if you will, they will click a button of approve, and that's the best button ever to see. And then you can sort of move it on to the rest of the pipeline. Now, eventually, at some point, there's still a lot of stuff that has to happen in between. There's things such as, depending on the environments, each team, again, is very different. You can have things such as a development environment, which will refer to your local machine that you'll be developing on. Then there's sort of a UAT environment, which you have to now, everybody's approved it, it's merged in, you have to now go and work on that. From there on, there can be another environment such as staging, which QA testers will then get their hands on it, and they sort of break your code as best as they can, which is something you really want to do, because believe me, when that gets into production and it breaks there, you're going to have a lot more people yelling at you than just the QA. So quality is above all the most important thing ever. Yes, there's some other things in terms of automated testing, but that's sort of out of the scope for now. So what you'll see, some teams only have something as simple as this. Other teams will have more columns depending on the processes. And quite honest with you, this is as complex as I would like a Kanban board to be. Now, quick segue away from software development. This is what most companies will run their software on, or their software project management, if you will. So I actually did an experiment, and I was like, right, if this is the experiment of, if companies can run multi-million rands worth or multi-million dollars of projects on this, what will happen if I take this concept of a Kanban board and I would bring that into my own personal life? Basic tasks like checking in with your insurance company, taking a call for car wash, whatever those sort of things, put that on a Kanban board. I trialed it for about a month, and I can say, quite frankly, it definitely helped in terms of productivity. You are a lot more on top of things, especially with studies and so on. So if it can work for software, it can definitely work for you. And again, when you get to the third year, one of the modules, change management, you'll definitely touch on this, and there's a lot more insight given into it. So it just does not stop at just software development. It can really go more than that. Cool, but that's enough about that for now. What should I code? This is another very interesting one. And unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer, as is in most software development. I've been coding professionally for 9 years now, and I'm still adding new projects. Some of them I haven't completed. But for me, it was about testing a new idea or a new concept or trialing a new software technology. One thing us as developers, and this sort of stretches a bit further than just junior or intermediate developers, I think it's a software development team as well. We are quite, and I'm including myself into this definitely, when a new shiny technology comes out, everybody wants to use it. And I think that may be the case of Rust that we saw earlier. I may upset in the community by saying that. But again, new shiny technology comes out, everybody wants to use it. It's the new hype, if you will. The hype train is real when it comes to languages as well. Unfortunately, when looking at it from a business perspective, you've invested thousands of rands, or I'm going to use rands as a currency for our use case. You've invested thousands of rands in terms of your ecosystem, your skills, your people that you've hired specifically for this language, to just go in and just change completely, let's say from a .NET ecosystem to a complete 180 and start using Node or Python for that. That is a massive shift in your teams. And that's something that does not happen overnight, even though businesses and executives would love that. But unfortunately, these things take time. And also, if it's a live system, it gets even more complex because customers are using it, you're generating revenue from it. And the last thing you want to do as a developer is go to your CTO, your Chief Information Officer or your Chief Technology Officer and tell them, listen, I'm going to change the entire stack to a different language because it's new and I like it more. They will tell you to get out of the office, and with good reason. The amount of instability that you're going to introduce into the environment can be quite disruptive. However, there are ways to do these sort of refactoring and migration paths from one language to another, or from one monolithic architecture to monolith, or from monolithic to microservices, sorry. There are patterns, and you can do that without impacting your customer at all. Again, it goes to the skill level and the proficiency of the developers in that language. Again, tying that back to our GitHub profile, that is why it's one of the great things to go if you see, like you saw with me using Dapper earlier, which is sort of a microservices infrastructure process. Before I can go and advocate for that at my current team or at any sort of company, I would have to know it to its core, best possible way. I would have had to build some sort of POC or proof of concept to go and present it. So just be careful of falling into that trap of I'm only going to use the latest and greatest technology, but any business sort of have to play catch up with that. And you may think it's the best thing, but another developer knows a little bit more than you and they say, listen, can it handle X, Y, and Z? And you'll be like, no, it can't. I haven't tested that yet. Your entire idea falls apart because, again, it comes down to the team and they have to get their buy-in for all of these sort of migrations, if you will. So going back to what you should code, again, there are quite a few. I've taken some examples of projects just to get your mind going. But again, it's really up to you and what you can either go wide or you can go specific. So what I will say about what you should code is I'm a huge supporter of documentation, documented code and processes, especially in a professional environment. Yes, the documentation will almost always be lagging behind a few versions, but the general UML architectural diagrams must be kept up to date with release. And please, I implore you guys, do not be a lazy, sloppy developer who has a sad excuse of saying my code is a documentation. I've heard this all too often, and quite frankly, I will not work with you. That's just my take on it. Other teams will think this is a joke or take it on from there. That's not how I work. So because of your curriculum, CTU offers their programming students, I'm going to focus on full stack projects. But for each of them, you can either break them out into a specialization like front end only, back end only, or database only, depending on what your interest is, and depending on what sort of role you want to go for. But before we look at an example, you have a choice. You can either go with a lot smaller projects, like I mentioned, or solving a specific problem, or you could go wide. So specific project, let's say, for example, you want to write a chatbot, or let's pick one, just a small service that shows that you can create some objects, you can read from it, and you can do some basic updates. That's a nice project. Or you could go a bit wider, which we'll see in a moment. Just remember, the more projects that you're going to be adding, the more documentation you're going to have to be doing, and depending on the amount of time that you have. Please don't start your portfolio a week before you start job hunting. You will not have enough time to go through everything, and that sort of defeats the purpose. Start as early as you can. Start right now in terms of your second year or your third year. Heck, even first year if you can. Start, as soon as you can understand basic concepts of building out basic code, and even if it's a console app or something, just start somewhere. So here is an example. You guys saw this one a few slides back. Just one moment. One of the perks of having an office at home. Sorry, so you saw this one a few minutes ago. So this is a Kanban board. You can build this in whatever framework you desire, ASP.NET, React, Angular, really depends, up to you. So here, the main premise, again, as I explained before, you can either go and say, right, I only want to build the backend of this. Let's say I want to go create some tasks, create just some user services and that sort of stuff. Your backend of choice or your database of choice can really be up to you if you want to use Microsoft SQL, NoSQL DB, or whatever the case is, or you want to combine all of them. I think the best approach for this one would be a full stack end to end. And again, you can host this on whichever platform you so choose. Cool, one of the other ones, and it may also be an interview question when you come to system design. So project 2 is a social media clone. This is a bit more complex depending on how much time you want to invest, but you should be able to build a somewhat basic Twitter, Instagram clone, including documentation, hosting, and features like registration, creating a post with text, video, audio, etc. Searching for some other users, adding a friend feature. You can really pick and choose what features you want to include into this. This should take you about 2-3 weeks to build something similar to this. And again, it depends on how fast you code or how versed you are in the technology. So this project type also enables you to show your mettle when it comes to software architecture, because you can go extremely detailed in this, or you can go super high level, perhaps a single ASP.NET app, and on there you can do sort of everything in there. Or if you want to go a bit more in detail, you can break this out into microservices, which will be a little bit more challenging for you given your current level, without completing the third year module. But again, a single app will still get you a long way. So yeah, so you also see that in terms of, I briefly mentioned interview questions. So in a systems design, we'll get to that in a moment. They'll ask you, for example, how to create a Twitter clone for me on a whiteboard, and you sort of have to go from there. So it's definitely worth your time to go and see how Uber, for example, set up their infrastructure. How does Instagram work at the back end? Read these sort of engineering blogs to sort of broaden your horizon in terms of there's more to life than just creating an app that can read, write, update, and delete. That's just one small aspect of the industry. Again, there's also some other great places in terms of public APIs that you can go and find, from weather all the way down to if you're a League of Legends player, you can interact directly with their API, perhaps build a nice front end on top of that, showing your last plays and stats. So most of the online games have their own APIs that you can go and integrate with. Again, doesn't really care what you're doing as long as you can show a full-on detailed documentation end to end. So hopefully in your second year, you should know and understand system design specifications, how to create a basic systems diagram, a UML diagram, for example. But again, don't worry, there's a lot of online resources for that. Cool. Project 3 can be an e-commerce store. Now, I know this is a very basic example and can be quite boring. But again, this shows quite a lot of things in terms of if you add an inventory, an orders, a cart, some social media integration as well. Let's say, for example, you are uploading a new stock item. Let's say, for example, a new gaming laptop, and you want to run a special. So you can create a Instagram account. As soon as the person is uploaded on their side, they hit publish, it goes live on their little e-commerce store that you've built. It automatically pushes, I hate using the word automatically, but it has integration enabled within it to go and push that same post, if you will, to the social media platform. Heck, you can even take it one step further that I just thought about. Why don't you create a single place or a store, for example, to go and say, right, I want to create a post, hello world, and when I hit post, I want to choose which platform to go and send this post to, both Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, pick your social media, and it sort of handles multiple of them, either to single platform or to multi-platform. These are just some ideas. And again, there are online a lot more resources. They'll go into details about this. But again, whatever you do, make sure of the following. You are coding it yourself, not you and a friend, not you and Stack Overflow, because one of the things as an interviewer that I personally like to do is I'll go into your GitHub profile, I'll go and find a project, extract the class from there, and I'll be like, hey, I found this at this project in this process. Would you just mind going through this with me and just explain what's going on there? Just so that A, that I know that A, you wrote this code yourself, and that B, that you can actually have the technical capacity to explain what you have done there now as well. Because it's great if you copy and paste code, but do you actually know and understand what that code does? What may be the side effects of introducing that into your framework? That's sort of the main difference between copy and pasting and actually looking for something specific that you want to go and solve, or this particular to your problem. Cool. So that sort of wraps up the main concept of GitHub projects that you can go and tackle. Again, summary, you can either go as wide as you want with multiple smaller projects or one big project. What I would like to see from the second years is a nice big project, so they can sort of carry on that through the next year or so to third year, so they can have multiple iterations of it, and there can be sort of a main section built around it. Cool. Then sort of the other facet to this. So you've now we'll look at CV in a moment, but as far as the public, not portfolio, but the main meat and potatoes of your GitHub section. So you're going to have to build a website at some point for yourself. Now, this is about the 15th or 16th iteration of my own site that I've used. Again, I'm using this as an example. But yeah, you can sort of really stretch because you're full stack, your UX expertise, if you will, and sort of your nice web experience as well. Again, not everybody of us, including myself, I'm no UX expert. I don't specialize in front-end design at all. But again, you can reach out. Perhaps you know somebody that does UX, for example, or go look at a bunch of examples online and sort of build up your own design language, if you will. Or if you've got the capital for it, hire a UX designer for an hour, give them some ideas, and they come up with a cool design for you. It really depends on how far you want to go with this. But again, keep it simple, keep it basic. What I did wrong in my first couple of iterations, I wanted to build this fantastic, awesome thing that does everything. I did not have the skill level back then to do it. And there's a lot more investment in terms of time because the project just does not end. So on the contrast to this, don't go and build a Wix site, especially if you are a developer or a WordPress site. Unless you're applying for a PHP or WordPress position, cool, you can do it. But if you're applying for a sort of a junior position in terms of front-end development, whether that be ASP.NET, React, or Angular, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take your website URL, open up the dev tools, and see what framework you used. And I may even from there sort of go and ask you where's your source code for it, so that you can go and discuss it a bit more as a project. For this example, I went with 2 tones of colors, the most classic ones that are there. And my main strategy with this is, now again, it's your own personal choice. Now, I've done most of these. It really depends. So my first iteration, I went with I believe it was ASP.NET that I built it on. And including on that, I had a fully functioning blog that worked in it. It integrated with my Twitter and LinkedIn account. So whenever I make a post on those platforms, it reflects back on my main site. So I can give people one URL and they can find out everything about me that's required from a professional environment. But ever since then, I realized that people, why would I want to go to your website if I can just go to your LinkedIn profile or that? So instead of sort of going through that whole exercise, I created a single page and just use that as a link back page, if you will. So I can give you one site, and from there on, you can go and find on, in terms of code, that links to GitHub account, blog goes to Medium, profile goes to Git as well, and opinions goes to my Twitter section. So they do that really well. But I think for yourself starting out, this can also be a portfolio piece. Again, if just caution on this, if you're going to be working with public APIs, there are probably API keys or JSON web tokens that you're going to be using. Do not check them into source control. That opens yourself up to go and, for me as a bad actor, to go into your repo, find those keys, and I can hijack your account from there. So if you're going to be using source code, do not check in username, passwords, personal email addresses, or even personal email addresses and their user credentials. That's important, as well as public tokens. Be very cautious of that. Again, really cool thing about ASP.NET, the way, or .NET in general, you can use different environment for files. You can just look online for documentation around that. It's quite helpful. Cool. One of the other things I want to talk about here is SEO. So search engine optimization. Obviously, you want people to go and find your website. So again, if that is your main objective, then maybe you can lean towards a WordPress or Wix site. But again, you would have to have a strong, I don't think SEO is enough for just that, especially if you're going to be building a site similar to this. But again, so just be cautious of using your front-end frameworks. You want to go with sort of a static rendering app. In this case, this one's built with Vue.js and with a framework called Nuxt, nuxt.js. That's sort of how I built this one, just to go and try it out and see if it's working well for me, and it has so far. You can include things such as Google Analytics, create a free Google account, add your analytics. It's like a JavaScript script that you add to your, I think it's at the bottom or the top, can't remember, to just go and see who's viewing your profile and so on. You can take it one step further and use something like Cloudflare to go and sort of protect yourself from DDoS attacks, if you will. They've got some nice free tools available as well for that. Domains, you can really buy that from anywhere. Most of the places like GoDaddy, I believe, is one of the cheaper ones to go and do. And you can buy domains from a couple $100 to thousands of rands. It really depends on how much you want. I think this domain I paid 150 Rand for it or $200 for it, and it's valid for like 3 years or 2 years, depending really. So that's some great examples there. Let me just take a sip of water here quickly. All right, one of my next things I really am quite passionate about talking. So leveraging social media. Guys, when I started, obviously Instagram wasn't around, nor TikTok, and most of the other platforms. YouTube was really starting out, and there weren't really a lot of content creators on it as well. And internet connectivity in the early 2000s, or even from 2010 to 2012, fiber was really still picking up. So the bandwidth for media consumption was quite low, but I think in today, there shouldn't be no longer an excuse for you to not have an online presence. Now, it's very important to distinguish between these two things. So let's first talk about privacy. When you are engaging online, you can be held accountable for what your statements. That is now passed into law, and please keep that in mind. So you have a choice. Either A, you can go full transparent, and what you use for your work social media and what you use for your own personal social media, it's one account for everything, and you're going to use that. Again, I would advise caution. Again, ask yourself, should I be sharing this? If you're even asking that question, just don't. Be respectful of everybody online. Don't be an internet troll, especially if you're looking at a professional environment. That can lead you to getting a warning or losing your job. So social media can be a good thing, and it can be a bad thing. In my opinion, I firmly believe that social media is a great way to interact with communities, great way to interact with peers, and especially now in the COVID world, I've interacted now with people from many years my senior to junior developers as well. So keeping that contact and still being connected is quite important. I think that's one of the great things about it. Again, technology can either be used for evil or good. It depends upon your definition there. So going to your accounts. So what I've done, I've opted for the pure professional approach to this. I've only have my LinkedIn account, what it is, I'll get to that in a moment. and my Twitter account. Those are sort of two main accounts, and they're only geared towards business only. So all things software development, all things career related, that's what I post on there. I don't own any personal social media accounts at all. I think that's private and that's personal. So when it comes to terms of Facebook, I don't own a Facebook account simply due to their questionable practices around data that goes along with Instagram and WhatsApp as well. Again, personal choice here. If you're going to be approaching yourself as a brand, which is sort of one of the next thing I want to talk about now, your skill set can be marketed the same way you would market, again, I'll use a gaming laptop in this case, or a brand or a slogan or a service. You can market your skill set, and that's sort of the change that people need to start taking a look at. Previously, you would normally go and say, here's my CV, and you start dishing that out to different recruiters and people, like, hey, can you please hire me? But again, it's a gamble for both the company and the candidate starting. It is impossible to get to know somebody in the, let's say, 4-hour interview process if you group all the interviews together. It's only about an hour. So it's definitely a chance. So one of the first things that, if you're giving out your CV and you've gone for the professional side of created an Instagram, a Twitter, a YouTube account, and a LinkedIn account, all geared towards promoting my skill set as a software developer. What you share on that, we'll get to that in a moment. Include that on your CV. Because that's a great way, because as soon as I get that CV, the first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to go to your LinkedIn account and see what's up about it. So without any further detail, let's first take a look at what exactly is LinkedIn. Okay, so LinkedIn social network, it was acquired by Microsoft not too long ago. I don't have the exact dates on here. I don't have that in the presentation, apology, but it was acquired by Microsoft. There's been some they acquire it, some awesome features start rolling out into it, and it really turns it into a powerful professional network. So as I mentioned, this is a social network for professionals. Now, what you'll find quite interesting about this, if you look at the market research, different demographics lean towards different types of social networks. I would say your next generation, your Gen Zs, for example, I believe, they'll lean more towards the TikTok, Instagram. Your older crowd will lean more towards sort of the Facebooks of the world and that sort of stuff. Again, so when you're creating your marketing message, make sure it's tailored towards that specific demographic. I didn't include TikTok into this. Again, I still have to see how that can really be leveraged in terms of software development. But we'll get to that discussion when it comes to Instagram and YouTube. Key posts, work related. Now, I'm going to pause there for a moment. As a working professional, I'll expect you to have a LinkedIn account, even if it's just an account created with your picture on there. The more detail you can give about that, the better, because both local and international candidates or companies will go look at that account, sort of gauge a bit more, because your CV is just a 1 or 2 page brief summary about you. It doesn't really tell your full career history. So on this side, keep your posts work related. I would recommend to avoid sort of religion and politics out of this, because you can get creative with it, but be very cautious. That's a sort of a double-edged sword there. Again, you don't want to alienate any specific demographic, because at your start of your career, your main focus is to go as wide as possible, to get as many followers, as much reach as you possibly can. So please do avoid those two sort of main topics. Another thing about this, really cool. So do post about your code project. So we previously spoke about the portfolio section. Start a build log and say the quick you can either do video or text. People are more inclined to watch video than text. So keep it brief. Say, hey guys, I'm going to start my project on a social media clone. This is what I'm going to do in it. This is my goal. Let's see if I meet in the next couple of days. And that's it. And sort of keep people up to date with it. Now, later on, we'll talk about blogs and stuff. You can also leverage that. So again, it's about creating your persona as a working professional, because how you are representing yourself on these platforms is how you're going to represent yourself and your team as well. Again, this gets a lot more technical than just a CV and just a portfolio. I think those days would have passed in the earlier years, but in a COVID world where jobs are highly competitive right now, it's about how much information can I get about this candidate, and are they a good culture fit in my organization? As I mentioned, keep your profile updated, very important. Do post regularly, do reshare. So if you read a cool technical blog, let's say about how Uber did their ride sharing app, for example, do share that, start a conversation, start getting involved in other conversations as well. Again, if you are making a comment, make sure that it's an informed opinion, not just shooting from the hip here, because that can also do damage to your brand as well. Cool. Changing gears, let's talk about Twitter. Yes, it's still around, I believe. So what's really cool about this, it's great for project updates. I think one of the other sections is it helps you keep in contact with the industry and other professionals or groups. So many times I've seen to keep up to date with components. Let's take React, for example. There's a phenomenal feed that you can go and follow of, which sort of a aggregation of many developers posting to it and say, listen, hey, I've just built a calendar control or a social media component that you can go and use. So that's sort of a great sort of information aggregation section. There are other plugins that you go and use, so you see multiple Twitter feeds, if you will. But that's sort of great to keep up to date, especially if you go attending conferences or want to see, hey, what are other industry professionals, what are the speakers at Microsoft saying about this technology, sort of to gauge where the industry is at and sort of to engage with these industry professionals. Updates about conferences, as I mentioned. Product framework announcements. This is also quite cool. So let's say, for example, you are following ASP.NET or .NET Core, and they are preparing to release a new version of it or some new features. Great place to keep up to date with that as well. Great stuff. So let's talk about, I think these two are quite challenging for me to speak about, both Instagram and YouTube. I can't really speak too much towards Instagram. I don't have an account there, but again, sort of the same concept can be applied because both of these platforms are predominantly video related. So if you are a content creator, if you're already streaming for whatever that sort of case, you already have the equipment and you don't need a lot of equipment to get started. I think one of the most important key takeaways there is if you're going to be creating video content, make sure your lighting is up to date, is well lit, and you've got proper audio. Video quality really, because if you're going to be sharing your screen, that's not really that much of an issue unless you are going to be showing your face, but there are some trade-offs there. So content creation, keep it short, keep it to under a minute or for most of your YouTube shorts, for example, or for your Instagram posts. Unless you really want to do a course of like, hey, I'm a student, I'm busy learning this is sort of my study process, how I approach this thing. Because again, as an employer, they want to see how do you approach complex problems? How do you solve it? How do you react in face of a difficult problem and how you sort of overcame that? That's actually an interview question right there. As mentioned, you can do short clips about code. This is how I create my for loops. Or, hey guys, I found this real cool feature in VS Code. Let's take Docker, for example. I've installed this plugin. You have created a nice Docker image that does A, B, and C. Don't worry, third years, you'll learn about that in your microservice section. Yeah, so announcements of new blog posts. This is something I think that all students can really use. So let's say, for example, you've started a Bulldog, as you mentioned earlier. You did a quick short on LinkedIn, say, hey, I'm going to tackle this new project. This is going to be my outcome on it. You write a quick blog post about it. You can also sort of leverage that again and sort of reference back. So your entire social media social platform can sort of interact with each other and be backlinks, so you can sort of drive that traffic, if you will. And again, this is the same thing that goes for brands. If it works for a brand, it can work for your skill set as well. Your experience of preparing for an exam, let's say you've just taken the Azure DevOps exam or the other AWS exams, for example. This is how you prepared for it. These are the resources that you've used. This was your final mark. Share those things. And I think adding on further to that, if you've passed an exam and you are super excited about it, share it on LinkedIn. People want to know about that. You've achieved something great. Or say, hey guys, I'm about to go write this exam. Wish me luck, whatever the case is. Again, it drives brand awareness for your skill sets. As I mentioned, how do you solve coding problems? This is quite common online. To say I got stuck on building my e-commerce app and I could not for the life of me figure out why my requests aren't going through to my API. Meanwhile, I had the incorrect URL that I was using. That's a very basic example. Or I had this problem of it constantly wrote into my database and overwriting my records. Entity framework was misconfigured for whatever reason. These sort of things. Again, these are just some ideas I'm getting out there. Awesome. So taking a quick breather, if you will, slowing the pace down here. Keeping your skills sharp. Your education as a software developer will not stop at the end of college or that quick coding bootcamp. It is a lifelong journey to consistently and continuously improve yourself and the craft of software development. This is not an industry to stagnate and not to keep your skills sharp. Sharpen the new technologies will definitely come at a cost because a new technology will come out tomorrow, rendering your skill set, your business proposition completely obsolete. I've seen that happen. It's not fun. So it is always in your best interest, both as a developer or as a company, to keep up to date, keep relevant. And yes, that is a huge undertaking. You will feel overwhelmed over many, many years, but you also see the patterns start to emerge. And that's really where developers start to shine, is if they can identify these patterns and having that adaptability in any environment. So it's a lifelong learning. I've seen so many degree graduates thinking that they have a degree and they're going to stop learning. They've done their honors or something and this is the end for them. It is not. That is why you'll have somebody that's self-taught or coming from a college for 1 or 2 year program coming in and they can go toe-to-toe with intermediate developers or even call out some senior developers on some mistakes, which again is a good thing because the more, if you're not failing, you're not learning. Cool. So some post CTU things to take a look at. This can be as a supplement to your course or once you've completed. You can take a look at some subscription services such as Pluralsight, Udemy for something like courses very specific to what you're looking for. I do own quite a few. Then on LinkedIn Learning, so if you sign up for LinkedIn Premium, I'm going to sound like a sales rep for them, but if you sign up for LinkedIn Premium, you also get LinkedIn Learning as free with it. And what's quite cool about that is many courses, many different languages, also touches on soft skills, which is something I didn't include in this presentation, and I apologize about that. I was having a conversation with a QA engineer the other day around developers, so they are phenomenally great at the technical level. But what about the soft skills? How do they treat the other developers around them? How do they handle adversary conflict in a work environment? Do they have the ability to explain a very technical, complex problem at a high level to a non-technical person? And I definitely feel that across all institutions and across all programming courses, this is something our industry lacks, I believe. The days are done when you take a developer, put them in a corner in a dark room and just throw food at them and they create software. That's not how software is created. It's created in an open, collaborative environment. So as throughout your career, whether it's a junior all the way up to a CTO or CIO or even an entrepreneur, if you will, a founder of a tech company, you are going to have develop the ability to explain these complex problems in very simple terms. Not because your person you're speaking with is mostly because they've got a lack of technical background to what you have, and it's expected of you. As you go higher up in terms of intermediate, senior, and architect, it's expected of you to be able to explain this. It is something that I'm still learning to this day. I think I'm going to be learning from it many years to come. So soft skills, do focus on that as well. And I've actually seen a self-taught developer get hired, not based on their technical proficiency, but purely based on their attitude, their way of public speaking, as well as how they explained these certain complex problems that they were knowledgeable about and knew how to explain. So that can also be a huge factor or deciding factor in your interview process. Other places you can definitely learn: YouTube, great source. There are so many great content creators on there, specifically around some Microsoft Most Valued Professionals, MVPs, also have started their own channels. And there's a lot of deep dives into the core of .NET, if you will. Or the other day I was watching the .NET team discuss their journey from sort of old ASP forms all the way up to where Blazor is today. Again, that is context that really adds to your repertoire, if you will. Other places definitely take a look at blogs. This is my main source of it because I want to hear from people who have worked with the technology, who have solved this or ran into a problem. Sometimes they've solved it, sometimes they haven't. So that's also a great place to go look at, such as your Medium, your Scotch.io, Hackanoon, or Dev.to. These are just some, and I'm sure many more will follow after this. Another place, this is sort of something that I started picking up quite recently, is technical white papers. Yes, it is extremely dry reading, and it's very technical, very detailed, but you don't get that level in any blogs of any of the previous sources. So do not be afraid of them. The more you read, the more quickly you can sort of interpret the information. Again, the degree graduates going honors, PhD, and so on, they are the ones who really enjoy these technical papers. And for us as developers, again, don't throw that away. There's a lot of golden nuggets of information in there that can really improve your day-to-day development, or can either make or break your project. Especially specifically if you are working at a intermediate to senior level, you are expected to give feedback to your management and to the other teams as well. So that will really help you with that. Great stuff. Let's get into interviews. I think this section is not as long as the other ones, but it's valuable nonetheless. So this section is going to be focused on the interview process, how you can prepare for it, the processes to go through it, and hopefully setting you up for success at the end. So let's talk about CV. This is still a thing that's around and will still be around for quite some time. So Here you've got a minimum 1 page, max 2 pages. Even for myself, I think I've currently got a 1.5 page, which can definitely be shortened to 1. As a junior developer, you don't have a lot of experience. You've got your qualifications you've just done. You have hopefully read a few technical books. There are quite a few online to go through. You've got your vendor specifications or vendor certifications that you can add on there as well. Do include your course curriculum, what you've studied over the last few years. Cherry pick some of them out there and tailor your CV towards the application that you're going to be, or the job you're going to be applying for. If, for example, you say you've got expertise in ASP.NET, but you're applying for a React position, or you've got Python experience, but you're applying for an ASP.NET position, tailor your CV according to that and your skill set. So don't use just one universal blank template for it. Personal information, you do not have to include your ID number on this. You do not have to include your address on this because that's all personal information, and I think that falls under the POPI Act, so you don't have to share that as well. That will be shared at a later time in the interview process when you're sort of signing your contract and that sort of stuff, so you don't have to give out that level of personal information. Do add your social media handles to this. Do make them aware that, hey, I've got a GitHub account. You can go and check out my portfolio here. If you've even, let's say, for example, you've built your e-commerce app or your Kanban application, you have a live URL for that, mention that in there. That's what you're going to sort of use to pad up your white space in your CV. Say, hey, I built this project. Here you can find the technical documentation. Here's a live URL to it. And that's how you sort of prepare these things. Say, for example, you worked on a college project that you are quite proud of and you got super high marks for it. Share that in your CV as a quick, brief summary. I'm talking about brief, one-liner for the title, maximum 3 lines in terms of, hey, this is what I've done on this project. Here's a link to go and find out more. Again, CV, brief summary of your skill set. And that's sort of just to weed out who is this a IT technician that's applying for an intermediate developer role and has got no expertise. That sort of will be get cut out of the funnel from that. So another thing I see quite often, I did this as well, I'm including myself into this group, don't rate your skills. Don't go and say, listen, I've got a 4 out of 5 for, I'm a 4 out of 5 developer on HTML and CSS. One of the concerns about that is based on what scale, what metric, what framework. If you've passed a exam on HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, I believe there is a Microsoft exam for that, then you can say, hey, I've passed this, but you can't go and rate your own skills. I've seen candidates do that normally to sort of pad the empty space. Why don't you use that empty space again, like I said, to sort of show these are the actual projects that I've built. And again, as you go through your career, your GitHub projects may be included, but you also may include your actual working experience of, hey, I worked on this project, we integrated with API X, and these were some of the challenges on there. Very brief, keep it short. Simple formats. So when we talk about recruiters in a moment, they're anyway going to copy your CV into their own format. So keep it simple, keep it straightforward, and easy to update. I've done my own CV, I've designed my own CV in Google Slides as a presentation. Man, that was a mission to update. It takes me like hours to do that. I've learned from it, don't do it. Keep it simple, keep it in Word, and you're good to go. Cool. Next section, recruiters. Can't live with them, can't live without them. When you put it thusly, they are an interesting bunch. Now, I've written this as diplomatic as I possibly could, with giving both insight on from the candidate and from the recruiter, because it's a relationship and it's a give and take on both sides. So we could take a look at platforms and agencies. So platforms, you guys have heard me mention OfferZen. So take a quick segue, and probably a marketing plug for them as well. OfferZen is a developer recruitment platform where both companies and software engineers can go sort of meet each other and find great fits and opportunities for them. So you as a candidate can go and register on there. You can go through a whole portfolio or a profile that you set up. What are you looking for? What is your experience, your language, your different programming languages, that is. Where do you want to work with? Most of the time, it's going to be remote in the current COVID world, which is really cool because that opens you up to not only local opportunities, but international as well. Because remember, international companies, they are strained with budget. Some of them are growing. Skills are not available in the country. I was speaking to a company from the Netherlands, a recruiter, it was a recruiter as part of the HR department. And she said that it was extremely difficult for them to find Node.js and React developers in the Netherlands, thus are looking abroad. And that's not the case only there. South Africa, for example, certain languages just aren't available here. So this gives you opportunity to sort of engage in the global community there. So OfferZen, cool platform. I've already had success on there. So how they work is you will be interacting directly with the companies. So if a company says, hey, Armand, I like your profile, I'd like to set up a quick 30-minute chat, when will you be available? You still interact with them directly. There is a career, not a counselor, I'll call them a recruiter for the lack of a better term. Sorry, Officer, for messing that up, but they will be there to sort of guide you and help you out with message templates, give career advice. And say, for example, you get an offer from 2 companies, they'll help you go through the process of which one should you take, or if you've had a difficult interview, then they can either go and speak to the key accounts manager. I've once had an incident where the company just didn't show up for the interview. Set it at 5 o'clock, they never showed up, rescheduled, never showed up. So that's sort of where they'll definitely step in and be like, hey, this is not how we work on our platform. Company, please respect our candidates' time. And it goes both ways. So that's in terms of platforms, do recommend them. Then there are recruitment agencies. It's important to note that if you have a bad experience with one agency, it's not the agency itself, it's the recruiter that you work with. Remember, recruiters aren't technical, they're not technical people. So if you're going to go into the fundamental details about how this database engine, you didn't like working with it, all they're going to hear is this guy doesn't like technology X. That's how they think. So your recruiter can either be your greatest asset in your team, or they could just completely bomb out your job search completely. So establishing a great professional relationship with your recruiter as early as possible, the better for yourself. Cool. So let's talk about working with, so the rest of this talk, we're going to speak more about agencies themselves. So don't work with multiple agencies. You can, but that may land you in hot water, especially when the interview starts rolling in. And also be transparent from the get-go. So if you know that you're in a second or third process and a new agency reaches out with an opportunity that you want to pursue, be transparent with them, be honest with them. So listen, I'm in a current second or third round with it. It looks like it's going good, but I definitely want to pursue your candidate further. Also, up until this point, your main focus has been sort of in preparation for this moment. So you've got all your AQF qualifications, your vendor certifications, your portfolio is set up, you've marketed like a beast, and everybody knows about who you are, what you're working on, you're looking for new opportunities and joining in some really cool teams. The more information you can give your recruiter, the better they can market your skills. It's just that simple. So given 2 candidates, CVs come in, one candidate is just a 1-page CV where they rated their own skills on there, and they've got some information about who they just graduated. Cool. The other candidate comes and say, right, I've got 3 active projects that I've worked on. Yes, I may not have, again, that is workplace experience if you think about it. These are the 3 projects that I have. Yeah, I've graduated. Here's my social media links. I've written a basic blog of student life, or I've passed the following exams in my experience. Here's my social media accounts. I am active and I'm ready and able to collaborate with the team. That's the candidate they're going to choose and want to work with. Also, be professional, be courteous, be friendly. These are basic things that you already know, but it really makes the world of difference. One of the other things, time is everything when it comes to the job hunt. Do not be late. Always be 10 minutes early. If you show up to a Zoom call 5 minutes in, why are you late? You've got no excuse to be late. If your interviewer is late, always be courteous towards them, because remember, the more friendly and courteous you are towards them, the better. One thing I will draw a sort of a separation from here. It does not mean because you are a junior developer or looking for an internship that it gives companies the permission to treat you in a subpar manner. When I was going through my recruiting process, recruiters didn't want to work with me in my first year. You're a junior dev because I didn't have a portfolio, because I didn't have all the other things sort of backing up my case. And the interviews that there were quite a few that was questionable. One incident was where I was sent for, I was looking for a junior position, but I was sent for a senior developer position. It was a panel interview, and yes, this was still in the day of face-to-face interviews. These 7 guys were sitting in a circle around a whiteboard, didn't ask me any personal questions or got to know me, or straight up, here's a whiteboard marker, there's the board, reverse a string on there, we're waiting for you. And these guys are making a bunch of jokes behind me. So again, if you're even in a situation that you do not feel comfortable with and the interviewer, let them know immediately and excuse yourself from the interview. You are not there to be subjected to any sort of subpar behavior at all from them. And that also goes to show your level of professionalism. Cool. So making a segue away from that. Interview types. Now, I definitely did struggle to piece together this this slide specifically because there are so many variations. So I've tried to generalize what I've seen a lot over the last few years, and I'm definitely going to make a split between local and international interviews as they are quite different. Cool. So there will almost always be an introduction with it, whether you're using a platform such as OfferZen, really great, so you go take a look at that, or agencies. So you've spoken with your recruiter, you know that your interview is at 8 o'clock in the morning. Be prepared, be ready. Before I get into that, the introduction section, because we're doing most of our meetings online, please ensure that the environment, your video is on. That's going to be one of the things. Ensure that your background is clear and clean. Otherwise, please use a predefined filter, if you will. You just use the predefined filters. Stick with that. Don't use any sort of custom wallpapers or that sort of stuff. Yes, you can show your personality later, but doing that, keep it professional, keep it just a standard there. Then there's going to be some sort of round two. Now, round two is sort of where the split will happen. So in the introduction phase, you like the company, you like what they're saying, they like the product, the ecosystem, the environment. You get along with your boss that's interviewing you. Sometimes it may be your boss, sometimes it may not. Sometimes it may be a senior developer just doing a screening. So may ask you some technical questions. It may be an HR person just gauging your personality type and so on. But introduction is quite brief, 30 minutes to 45, really depends. I would say the last round, my introduction period is about an hour and 15. Again, depends on how much detail you want to go into. So round two, you're definitely going to take a look at, that's your technical interview. Now this comes in a few different flavors, if you will. You either get the online assessment, where they'll give you a link, you go to some online platform, and they'll ask you some computer science questions or algorithm questions, whatever the case is. The second one is a GitHub-based assessment, so a take-home project, where they'll either say, hey, go and build like the tax TIM example I mentioned earlier. Here's a quick brief about it has to have these following business rules. Here's a table with some formulas in. The app has to have feature A, B, and C. You've got 5 days, build that, share the code with us when you're done. When you get those interviews, do keep the company up to date. Do inform them that, hey guys, I'm making some great progress, especially if you're going to be taking a little bit longer. So that keeping that feedback going to your company or to your recruiter is quite critical. Your recruiter will normally check in with you by the second day, see, hey, how far are you going? Are you needing any assistance? If anything is unclear, do reach out to your recruiter or to the company directly and say, well, only reach out to the company directly if you're working on a platform such as OfferZen. Otherwise, do go through your recruiter. If you're going through an agency, never contact the company directly. That's sort of your recruiter's main role. They are there to manage the relationship. So again, work with your recruiter, not against them. Cool, so that's sort of the round two in terms of the take-home project. I do enjoy that one a lot more because you can go a lot more in depth and in detail, add some documentation on there. And again, if you've been working on your profile, this would be second nature to you right now. You wouldn't even blink to do this anymore. It's a straightforward project then. What you should not do there is do not copy most of your code online. Do not ask a friend to write it for you. They will pick that up very quickly, and that's the quickest way to get out of an interview process right there and then. And the recruiter's going to be like, whoa, why are you asking other people to do your work for you? Is that something you're going to be doing in the working professional as well? So that will put a black mark on your name, basically. Don't do that. I think there's a lot of there's maybe a shift away from the sort of the take-home assessment because of people taking chances like that, which is quite sad, to be honest. Then getting into the third round, this may be sort of a culture interview. A culture interview can be a panel interview where people will ask you questions on how do you handle this type of scenario, getting to know you a bit more as a person than the business professional. You can't really prepare for a culture interview. You can look online for different questions to answer, but after your fifth or sixth interview, you'll be so into the ways of work, if you will. So that's sort of the interview process, a very generalization of it. Some of these interviews can go up to around 6, 7. I've heard of that. In my opinion, that's complete and utter overkill. But again, that's my opinion. It depends on the company process that they have. I think the highest one that I've gone to was a round 4, and that was to go and review a bunch of Python code and reinterpret it in a different language. That was quite an interesting one. Cool, so that's some of the stuff you'll find locally. So let's look at international interview opportunities. There you would find a lot more in terms of the similar round 3-round structure, but one of the things is you'll have an introduction. Round 2 is a full-on technical one, where this may also be to South Africa as well. Just one moment. Sorry about that. So Also adding to the round to both local and international, there you'll have a live coding demo. So what will happen there is you'll be sharing your screen in your choice of IDE. That'll include both a few questions around reverse this string, reverse this algorithm, create a class, create a basic object, and they'll sort of constantly ask you questions around that. So you'll be live coding and they'll be giving you feedback. And that's quite a nice one because you get to see both how your future team works and interacts with you as a developer. You can ask them questions back and sort of a nice way to see not only in a code-wise, but on a personal level, do you get along with them or not? Especially from a junior position, you want to work with people who is going to mentor you, who's going to motivate and inspire you to do more and be more, instead of somebody that will give you constant criticism and break you down as a developer. You don't want to work with people like that. So their round 3, again, can be locally, it's a panel interview on culture. Round 3 internationally can be a systems design interview, where again, digitally, you'll have a whiteboard open up in front of you, whatever technology you want to prefer. And that's where we'll sort of ask you, right, can you architect in the next 30 minutes a Twitter-like clone? And how would you approach it? So it'll give you this very vague, open-ended architectural question, and that's sort of your time to shine, really. That's where you can go and say, right, the more detail and in depth you're going to, be cognizant of your time though. Let's say, for example, you've got 30 minutes, write that all out. Then you can say, right, for this section, this is why I chose this technology. This is how much detail I'm going to go into. And again, as a junior, you'll be able to go speak about, I'll create a front end, maybe a back end for that, or I'll go with a full-on ASP.NET solution where everything's all put together. This is why trade-offs. That gives you the ability to present your work. So at that point in time, hopefully it wouldn't be the first time that you're actually talking about code or architecture to somebody else. Heck, even if you want, put a rubber duck on your desk and speak to that. But getting that public speaking experience is really important. Cool. So that's in terms of that. So preparation. I found a really nice quote by Benjamin Franklin around, by failing to prepare, you prepare to fail. So everything up to this point is about preparation for that interview. So with this section, like I said, clean your desk in your room that you are in. So if you're working from your bedroom or from a living room, wherever, keep it clean. It just helps you think a lot better. No distractions or interruptions. So if your video is going to be on and you've got pets or animals, I've got 2 cats. They video bomb my meetings on a daily basis. But when it comes to an interview, they are packed away, or not packed away, but moved to a different area. You can either be in a separate room or somewhere else. If you've got dogs, please be in a position where you don't have dogs barking in the background for whatever reason. Because again, it's your 1 hour pure focus between yourself and your team. You want to get as much value out of that as possible. Background, like I mentioned before, if you've got, for whatever reason, you can't, we do not want to share your background for privacy reasons, completely fine. Everybody respects that. You can sort of blur your background or sort of choose a default one for that. It's completely fine. Get enough sleep and eat a breakfast. This is something that's very underrated. Last thing you want to do is stay up all night till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning preparing for your interview. That's at 8 o'clock. You get there, you are drained, you are tired, you haven't had a proper breakfast, and that sort of ruins your mood completely. These are some basic things, but man, they make a huge difference in just your general behavior as well. Webcam on, it's very important. I'm normally suspicious if I'm interviewing with a company and their webcams are off. Personally, I ask them, can you please turn it on? I want to see the person that I'm going to be working with, at least for the first one. Then after, they can choose what they want from there. Also, the webcam on section goes for you as well. Again, doesn't matter. You can use your laptop webcam if you have. They are quite inexpensive. Another thing that's really, really important, I know you guys have been lectured to death about this, but please know everything you can possibly find on that company and the person you're interviewing with. Stalk them on LinkedIn, stalk them on their social networks, know who the person is. And if they don't, always what I find quite interesting is that if you're working with a recruiter, ask them, who's going to be interviewing me? Write down the name. You can also see on the email, on the interview invite, who the person is. Go and find them online, see who they are, what are their likes and interests, how long have they been with the company for. Ideally, you want to interview with somebody that's been there longer than 6 months or at least a year, so you can engage with them, sort of what the working culture is like, and so on. So same with a company, go onto their social media, see what new projects they're working on, ask questions. Let's say if the company's working on something interesting, ask the interviewer, hey, I saw this on your Twitter or your LinkedIn account, and could you tell me more about this? I'm quite curious. That just shows that you've taken that preparation and you are diligent. Again, coming back to those tenets that were mentioned in the beginning, diligence, perseverance, and hard work. It speaks to that definitely. then be friendly and positive. Nobody wants to interview a candidate who comes in a mood, or just, I'm here just to going through the motions. It's just another interview for me. I know it can be difficult. I know that the interview process can be quite daunting and draining, if it will. But remember, you just need one yes. That's all you need. And that's sort of my main premise as I go into that. Don't confuse nerves with excitement. This is another thing I see a lot of candidates, and it took me quite a while to get used to this, but it is a conversation. The days are done where you've got this corporate suit sitting in front of you and saying, right, I'm here to analyze your entire life story, and it's super threatening with that. No, it's not like that at all. It's a conversation. It is, I want to gauge, as a possible company or interviewer, I want to engage your thinking process. What value are you going to be bringing to my team? Are you fluid in terms of, are you adaptable to changing environments? Are you going to be a real asset and a team player as part of my team? Those are also the people that I look for, and in general in most teams as well. If the interviewer comes in and say, and this has happened to me before, they've thrown a piece of paper across at me across a boardroom, say, please fill that in when you're done, put it on my desk, and they literally just walked out. Needless to say, I excused myself from the interview and walked out. That was still back in the days when in-person interviews happen. So highly doubt that will happen in today's world, and I expect interviewers to be a lot more cognizant of the sort of negative behavior, if you will. But for yourself, even in those situations, be positive, be polite, just show your work ethic and your professionalism. That says a lot about you as a candidate and you as a developer as well. So coming back to nerves with excitement, I know it's a cliche to say, don't be nervous. It's a conversation. You're going to talk to somebody about something that you have a passion about, a software development. And as long as you don't confuse those two, you should be good. And also, nerves are quite bad because they freeze you up and you get tense and you sort of miss a lot of points that you want to discuss. Again, if you've got certain biases or certain things that the interviewer should know about, let's say, for example, you don't like doing eye contact, make them aware of it. Say, even just look above them or underneath their chin, depending, it really depends on your personality as well. Great thing about virtual interviews is it's not in person anymore, so I'm expecting a lot more candidates to be a lot more relaxed and just show themselves as a person, as a professional. Cool. Let's do some final takes. We're almost at the end for that. So again, we've spoken about in terms of insights. We've looked at both international companies, what they're looking for, what does the international markets look like, contrast that with local. Yes, they are very different. But again, I think that the core skills remain true in terms of specifically around full stack developers, ASP.NET, JavaScript, HTML, SQL, that are all sort of your core stack, if you will. From there on out, you should have branched to some scripting languages and just learn more languages than just get stuck on the one language to rule them all. And I think in today's world, that just is not the case anymore. We spoke about collaboration and how to collaborate with other developers online, how to collaborate with your future team perhaps, and how to create a platform or a code-based portfolio, if you will, about your project to sort of pad that, to use that as padding in your CV, and also to prepare yourself for those technical discussions, because again, you're going to be talking code before your interview and long after your interview process. It's going to be your daily thing. So the quicker you get used to that, the quicker you get into that, the better for yourself. Marketing, again, like I said, the same patterns and practices that are implemented for a brand, you can use for yourself, because again, your skill set can be marketed. If it can be marketed, you can reach a wider audience and you can start driving traffic to yourself as a brand as well and sort of market those skill sets. Again, big difference between that to your average developer who says, I want a job and here's my CV. Congratulations, there are thousands of other developers and people out there as well. So it comes down to how does your skill set differentiate, your market offering differentiate you from the rest of the market. I'd rather want to work with a developer who has taken that initiative, shown that foresight, and really wants to collaborate over a developer that just waits for the world to respond to him or her. So that's sort of the contrasting effect there. Preparation and execution. Everything like I mentioned before, your portfolio, your exams, your NQFs, your online courses that you've completed, your portfolio, all of that is preparation. But it's going to fall apart completely if you do not have that execution, that readiness for an interview, like those points that I've discussed before. So don't put in all the hard work, get to the last point, and you sort of skip out on some of those points, and then your interview falls apart. Again, you just need one yes, and then you should be good. Doesn't matter how many times they say no to you, that's really irrelevant. It's about just say getting the one yes in. Having that said, I think that should sort of wrap up this section. One more. So this sort of brings us full circle to the beginning. As I've mentioned, you only get to be a junior developer once in your career. So make as many mistakes as you can so you can learn from it. Because remember, if you're not failing, you're not learning. And even as a senior developer, having gone through all of this stuff, when I go do job hunting again or working with new clients or customers, you start basically from the beginning again. And again, as long as you have a North Star where you want to go towards, keep that in mind, but start focusing to bite-sized tasks, get them done and get them shipped. And that sort of builds up momentum of success. And I'll conclude with that. I think the best thing now is to move to the Q&A section.
Right, thank you, Armand. That was very interesting. Guys, you are welcome to post your questions in the chat box. Armand, I will start off and I will ask you just global companies, are they moving towards employing more South African developers? What's your take on that?
I think so. I think it's not only just South African developers. I think with COVID moving the world, the corporate world more towards, well, not just corporate, but startups as well and small businesses to be working more remote. This sort of has opened up the world stage to talent. In the two international companies that I've worked with quite recently, both of them have, actually it was 3 or 4 of them, who said they were relocating their development operations from the current country to South Africa specifically. So South African developers do have a reputation to be of high quality. So students, I expect you to uphold that. But yes, I think there is a big move for companies having now access to the talent pool, both local and international. And I think it's going to become quite more common for a developer to live in country X and then have their employment in a different country. Because remember, you also have a currency exchange. So if you can get the same quality of developer or even better at the same price or lower from a company perspective, they're going to take it.
Okay, I just think that we've got an issue here, technical issue. Mr. Lupanda, if you can just check the chat, we've got some students saying that there's no chat available. If we can just sort that out.
I'll check it quickly.
Thank you. Armand, I read that South Africa, compared to other countries, it might be better to stay in South Africa. I'm talking money now. Compared to other countries, it might be better staying in South Africa, earning a South African salary than going, for example, to the States, because the competition there is so much higher than over here. And you can do more with your money that you receive here in South Africa compared to what you can do with that amount that you receive in the States. So what's your take on that? If you've got any experience on that, maybe.
I do. I can speak to that. Yes, look, again, your developer salaries do differ around the world, especially in America. I mean, they're the competition. I mean, you got Silicon Valley there. Most of your tech companies are there. So your competition is a lot more higher compared to anywhere else in the world. But I think it depends on the professional. There's also other factors you have to consider, like quality of life, first world versus a second world country. All these sort of things do play a role. For myself, though, is if you are looking for the sort of relocation to another country, remember you've got a different culture. That's the first and foremost thing. Secondly, most countries require a BSc degree or higher. I think Canada at this point in time requires a BSc degree and a 1-year study as well as a supplement to it. So whereas you can do the exact same job in South Africa, earn a higher salary, and still there are trade-offs on both sides. But again, your competition when relocating to a different country, whether it be Europe or America, is going to be a lot higher.
Yeah. We have a little bit of technical trouble. Students that want to post questions can ask it to me personally, and I will repeat it here to Armand. My address is gerardl@ctutraining.co.za, or you can just search for my name, Gerard Liebenberg, and you can post directly to me, and I will then convey it to Armand. So Armand, tell us a bit about your latest interview that you had with this Australian company. First of all, where did you hear about them, or did they do you work through an agent that contacted you, or how did it work?
Sure. So the current interview process was through OfferZen. Again, I'm going to marketing plug for them here. Super great platform, allows you to interact directly with your future prospective employer. Most of the time, it'll be directly the executive that you're working with, the CTO or the CIO, or at least a team lead. So the previous interview rounds, they were not just them as an international company, there were other options as well. All of them were, it's a completely different vibe compared to South African companies. It's difficult to explain, but from their perspective, it's a lot more personal. They want to get to know you from the start. And where South African companies is a lot more giving the technical answers. This is what I want to know about, sort of more a rigid approach to it. So with Coveda, they've got a really nice interview process. One of the things you also have to keep in mind when interviewing with international companies is time zone differences. So my interview slot was mostly 7 a.m. South African time, which is early evening there between 5 to 6 p.m. on their side. So yeah, the first one was again, looking at a senior developer interview is a lot different to a junior. In terms of senior development, it is, you get stuck into the code and you have no problem going to the most finite detail on a specific given topic. So it was a lot more of a conversation because if you can keep those nerves in check, it becomes a conversation and you get to know the people that you're going to be working with. So we did a first round as introduction, which was an hour and a half. Right off the bat, I was interested in terms of tell me about your tech stack, approaching it from a sort of analytical viewpoint. But again, the culture there is a bit different. So one of the cool things about South Africa, I would say at least, is we are a multicultural country. And I think that gives us a huge advantage to a country that's only got one culture predominantly in it, because we are a lot more adaptable to different cultures. So that gives us an advantage. So the first round was quite straightforward, introduction, some high-level technical talk. The second round was more focusing on, because I was interested in to know what technical problems are you currently facing, and allow me to give some feedback and input of how I would go and solve that. Most developers would say that's not the right way to do it. They can hire you as a consultant to go and speak to that. But from my side, I'll give advice and feedback wherever I can if I can make something better. So we did the second round, and by the first 40, 50 minutes, I got the offer immediately in the interview. There was no third or fourth round.
Okay, and I know that they threw you into the deep end. I know that they want to move to the cloud, or some of the services they want to port that to the cloud. And you were instructed to start off and looking at some architectures, cloud architecting or what?
100%. So they're sort of in two spaces right now, both they're having some on-premise services, but as well as moving more towards they run hybrid. They've got both AWS and Azure. So of course, diversifying their stack, which is completely fine. So there's a lot more push towards the sort of having a single monolithic application, because it's an upgrade matrix basically, going from a monolithic application to microservices, then to serverless. That's what we're covering currently now on our third year course. So that's sort of an upgrade path. But for their side, I prefer to be thrown in the deep end. Give me your technical problems. Let's take a look at that and immediately gauge how, because in the working environment, you're not going to know everything. It's impossible to know everything. So you have to rely on your team members and your problem-solving skills to really debug the specific problem. So yes, to come back to your question, they are looking in terms of both cloud-based service providers, and there's definitely a move towards the microservice and serverless infrastructure.
Yes, if you can check the chat box, there has been I've pasted a question there from one student. Armand, can you see the chat box?
Yes, I can. So we've got a question here specifically around what would I advise starting out in the industry? Is it going to be should we learn a bit of something about all languages, or should we find one and try to get better at that language? So phenomenal question. Thank you for asking that. Myself, I started with C#. That's my primary language that I work with on a daily basis. From there on, I specialized onto to different languages such as Node.js and Python itself. Again, you can pick them up. You can, again, this is the question of going wide or going specific. It really depends on what you're going to be applying for. So let's say if you are a full stack developer or that you want to pursue a career in full stack, again, full stacks are generalists. I've only worked with one or two full stack developers that can go into the smallest level of detail across the entire stack. Most of the time, including myself, I'm a generalist, so I know a little bit about everything as best as I can. But that being said, I know enough to build an architect application end to end on the .NET stack or on a different stack if required, and what sort of cloud provider. So this is sort of knowledge that you definitely start out with. The biggest thing is just start. So I would recommend looking at CTU's curriculum in South Africa specifically, C#, .NET, you can't go wrong there. I mean, well-documented ecosystem. And that's where most developers start, and they sort of broaden their horizons by looking at different languages. And in fact, it is to your advantage as a developer to go and learn a completely different language. Let's say, for example, functional languages like F# or scripting languages like Python or Node, because it will make you a better developer. So other thing is, first get your basics down in one language. Your first language is probably the most difficult to learn. Then after, they just sort of, you can pick them up quite quickly. But yeah, C#, JavaScript, that's sort of your core stack.
Right, we've got a question here from Diane. When applying to the workplace, do they often try to test or humiliate you, and how do you deal with these problems?
That is a phenomenal question. That definitely speaks towards these soft skills in the industry. It depends the type of company culture. Company culture is a huge thing. You can see the culture in the interview immediately, and it depends on your personality. But also remember, the developer I am today is not the developer I was when I started. So you yourself also have personal growth that goes throughout this. Again, if you're working with developers who are out to, in your case, you're saying humiliate you or degrade your knowledge or anything, those are people that you don't want to work with, to be quite frank. There are some developers who have an ego problem, I will say that. Definitely at the start of my career, ego did play a huge role there. But the best way to sort of deal with that is just remember, it's a reflection of them, not yourself. So as long as you know yourself, you keep yourself composed and be professional, regardless of the environment, you'll always come out one cut above the rest. In terms of testing you, that is quite an interesting question, because after you've passed the interview process, the process is there to ensure that you as a developer you've proven yourself to be, hey, I can do this job based on this criteria. And yes, there will be stuff that you don't know. That's why you need a team to work with. If you don't know, be transparent about it. Don't try and bluff your way through it or use your ego to sort of get out of it, especially in interviews. If you get asked a question, it happens to me still to this day, explain component X or Y. Sorry, I haven't worked with that as yet. Would you mind telling me more about that, or where can I find more information about it? As long as you remain curious and humble throughout the process, you'll be completely fine.
Right, there are the next questions.
Cool. So question one, I think we can get to that one first. What do employers expect from entry-level developers? Well, I would expect you to know Git right off the bat. I would expect you to be able to create a basic application end-to-end. Let's take the ASP.NET stack. You know what a console app is, you know different project types, you know and understand coding structures, you can implement a class, you can understand inheritance, you understand solid principles, you've got a basic concept of software architecture, you understand software diagrams. So if I were to go out and draw a bunch of pictures on a whiteboard for you, you'll be able to take that and convert that from a spec to an actual application. The time can really depend on your skill level for that. So again, you must be able to be proficient in your language, you must be able to discuss certain topics about it. Again, you're there to learn as well. It's one of the biggest things. But from my seen is having the right attitude to a problem, and be a go-getter. Don't wait for somebody to come to you to give you work. Go out and find it. Be like, hey, I've just finished this. What's the next thing I can work on? And ask for detail. Remember, it's your team lead or your project manager. It's their main role to ensure you as a developer have all the domain knowledge that's required, all of these skills available. If you don't understand a specific application or something, they will find a topic expert for you. Be like, right, we can get 30 minutes with him, ask your questions. What I will say to junior developers when you start is schedule a 1 hour meeting with your team lead or the person you're reporting to. And in that hour, you aggregate as much questions as you can. So right, for this hour, let's quickly go to the following stuff. Because unfortunately, they are also trying to assist you in your questions, but they also have the rest of the team, the rest of the company to deal with at the same time. And it's a very fine balancing act. And just a final point on that is expect humility from both yourself and your team lead. Remember, it's in their best interest to set you up for success, but it's also your responsibility to act upon that and live up to the challenge, if you will. Second question, how many years does it take to become a junior developer? Well, that's an interesting question. Personally, this whole concept of junior, intermediate, and senior developers, I've seen people with job titles of senior developer and they've got 4 years experience. I've also seen software architects with senior software architect and they've got 8 years of experience. But but you can quickly gauge in just a technical conversation where the person is at in their software career. So most of the time, junior developers is from 0 to about 2-3 years, even though you would see on job ads, they want junior developers that has 2 years of experience. Well, checking out the air concept now. You can't get a job because you don't have experience. You don't have experience because you can't get the job, and vice versa. I mean, it's just insane. But again, if you have your portfolio of evidence ready and you've built up multiple projects throughout, let's say you're a third-year student or a second-year student, you've got a portfolio of evidence. So go and apply for that. The worst thing they can say is no. Then a third question, in which education institution converts a diploma into a degree? Well, I'm assuming you're asking, I'm going to assume that this question is relevant to your NQF6 if you complete that. Remember, if you want to go to the degree, that's another year of study. That is a NQF7, so that's a 3-year study that you have to complete. What I will say is I have looked into this concept, and my findings from it was you will still have to go and complete a degree. However, you can, like UNISA and other institutions, they do give you credit for your current qualifications and certifications that you have. So there's a trade-off for that. So instead of doing a full 3-year course, you may only have to do a 2-year course. But quite frank, I think there's a lot more advantage to completing your diplomas, your NQF5, NQF6, getting into the job market, earning that salary, building yourself up, and then completing your degree. That's sort of a nice trajectory. When you compare to first doing your degree, then going looking for a job, your skills aren't as relevant as what they should be. So again, there are trade-offs depending on which life path you have. But to answer your question, which education institution, I do not know if that is possible to go from diploma to degree, but they can give you credits towards your degree that you can go and do. Again, it's a lifelong learning that you have to go complete. So what book or article would you recommend us to read on principles that we as programmers should know? Just look for software design principles. One of the ones, I don't have article and resources available offhand, but what I will tell you is solid principles. So that's SOLID. Know that. Book I can recommend for you is Clean Code. It's a book written by Robert C. Martin, one of the great guys on software development. He's been around for many, many years, a great wealth of knowledge. He also has a YouTube series. It's quite lengthy, about 6 hours in total. Please do watch that, as that will give you a lot more detail about some of the topics that we discussed here and sort of gears you towards your starting of your career. So I read his book when I just started. It definitely changed my mind in terms of programming principles and just writing better code as a developer. I recommend that to all devs. So that's an interesting question. How do you manage your time efficiency between your work life and personal life? That sort of speaks to the work-life balance. And I'm going to take a page here from Gary Vee. He's a great marketer. Highly recommend you guys to take out his stuff, look at some of his stuff. It's on almost any social media on there. So work-life balance is quite a challenge. When I started out my career as a junior developer, firstly, I was earning 3,000 Rand a month, which is less than minimum wage right now. I was working about 15, 16 hours a day, Monday to Sunday, for that first year, which is insane. And yes, I did suffer from burnout. However, the amount of experience that I built up in that first year set me up for success in the coming years. So as a junior developer, your main focus should be on how much knowledge you can get out of, you can learn, and acquiring that as quickly and effectively as possible. The money will come later. Don't worry about that. And if you got into this industry for money, that is a very one-sided view of the world, I would say. Balancing time. Just take a sip of water here quick. So I'm normally up about at 6 a.m. in the morning, do the normal morning stuff, eat breakfast, get ready for the day. Normally about 7 to 8, read some articles, get and see what's the latest technologies. There's something I'm looking for. 8 to 5 is normally sort of your core working hours that I'm up normally. Then depending if I've got class from 6 to 10, otherwise it's definitely coding in my spare time. However, what I would recommend you guys is get at least 1 to 2 days worth of downtime. That's no screens, no games, no nothing. Just go outside and do something different. Also find a hobby outside of software development. But again, it's a challenge. Sometimes you work late hours, sometimes you don't work late hours. It's a constant sort of shift between the two. So a question related to game development. Just give me a moment to read this. What's the best practice going forward as opposed to normal application development? Should we start out by ourselves or look for companies to work for? Games development is a highly competitive industry. Circling back to the previous question around work-life balance, the gaming industry they are quite known for their push for work most of the time. It's a highly competitive industry. There are some really cool gaming dev houses in South Africa. You can go on Steam and see some of the games that they've built there. I can't really speak towards your application stack for game development. I'm not knowledgeable about that. So the best thing is to go and reach out to go on LinkedIn, find some local SA game devs, see what stacks they're working on, and take it from there. There's a follow-up question to that. Audio and visual assets, again, I can't speak to that. So when it came to my gaming experience working in the industry was around online gaming in the terms of online casinos, working with them. Yes, there are some games development there. However, that was split off to a different dev house to purely focus on that. What I would say is they did use, what's that C compiler? The name escapes me right now, but there are some cool things around that. Sorry, I couldn't answer your question to the best there. So another question, would it be accurate to include the time you studied as well as experience? Time you studied, well, by default, if you say you completed a certificate or NQF, that's normally a year. You can include that as a sort of a section right next to it. Say this was a 1-year diploma or a certification. Just go check. Diploma is normally quite a bit longer. That's like full 3-year study. And then it'll say diploma. Otherwise, it'll be a higher certificate or a certificate itself. So just go look at your qualification framework again. I'm seeing reference to diploma quite a bit. So you can include, let's say it's a 1-year study, and move from there on. You can also put that on your CV and in your LinkedIn process. Going to the next question. So there are quite a few, so I'm going through these guys a bit quite quickly. Sorry about that. So quality is key, you said. So should you have one good project and keep working on it, or should you try and make a few different projects? Again, it comes down to the question of how wide do you want to go or how specialized do you want to go. Obviously, if you pick one good project and you build that out to the best of your ability, you should be good. Otherwise, if you go to the more projects you're going to be adding, assuming that you can keep up the same level of quality across all of them. So in my case, you pick a project, you give yourself a time frame, complete that as quickly as you can, and then move on to the next one. And again, the more you have, the better for yourself. It just adds to your case.
Right, Armand, thank you so much. It looks like we answered all the questions there. That was very interesting, very informative. Thank you so much. Guys, I just want to reiterate what Armand has said here. Discipline, purpose, hard work. That is. He had an interesting slide there showing a cell phone that said, stand up, do the work, eat, sleep, and repeat. And that's basically what it comes down in software development. And a very important thing that he hammered on, reiterated, is in the IT industry, you study for the rest of your career. It never stops, and you have to get used to that. So it's an industry where you have to keep up to date, and it entails hard work. Armand, thank you so much. We really enjoyed that. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of interesting stuff that you brought us. Thank you for that. We see the quality and the value in things like GitHub, having your own profile, setting up your own profile, your own projects that you build and add it to that and that kind of thing. So guys, when you do a FA, do it properly and add it to GitHub. Start working on your profile. Very good idea and things to do for the future. It will influence your future. Thank you, Armand. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your time. We will chat again soon.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
can I just ask one more question to Armand?
Yes, since we can hear you, that's fine if you can answer. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to get the question in before he left.
100%.
Okay, so let's say you're applying for a mobile applications developer role. Will employers actually ask you to sort of showcase any app that you have developed and whether or not it's been published on the Play Store?
So yes, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Yes, they will ask you to show your portfolio of mobile apps. If you can publish it to the Play Store, go for it. Don't wait for that. So again, it comes down to improving your case or making your case as a junior developer. The more apps you can have and the more you can show and the quality of it, do not skimp on quality. So in your case, do send them a link to the app. If you can sideload it, even better. But if you can put it on the stores, whether it be Apple or Google, even better for yourself.
Right. Thank you, everybody. We'll chat to you soon. Enjoy your weekend. See you next week. Hard work. And give your mother a hug and your father a hug. Just spread the love this weekend. Tell them that you appreciate them. Okay, guys. Chat to you again next week. Cheers.
Cheers.